Welcome to the LBA Monthly Roundtable. I'm pleased to introduce, most of you probably know, Jaimi Justice, the Executive Vice President of the Health Domain at the XPRIZE Foundation. She will be talking with the LBA's James Peyer about the XPRIZE, everything you wanted to know about the XPRIZE, but were afraid to ask. Well, today you can ask. You might have seen Jaimi as she traveled the globe promoting XPRIZE. The XPRIZE, I learned last week, has been, there are 429 teams registered from 53 countries, which is pretty impressive. So I'm going to turn it over to James, and I look forward to hearing more of what you have to say.
Thanks, Risa. And Jaimi, it's always fun to hang out. I think this is the first time that we've been doing any kind of quasi-public event. No, that's not true. We did one right as the X Prize was launching together. Um, but I've had probably half a dozen conversations with you about different bits and bobs. Let's say okay, about different bits and bobs of like what you have shaped X Prize to do. And I think the the back and forth that you and I have had a few times that I think would be really interesting to sort of tear apart a little bit, and some things dive back into, and some things as your strategy has continued to evolve, I would love to get an update on is kind of how have you shaped this the longevity X Prize or the Healthspan X Prize to be really relevant to what we as like a group of CEOs that are all on our own path building biotech companies, not just to compete in X Prize, but to, build drugs for, other indications and longevity related things, health span related things. Like, how can we collaborate with you? I think that's going to be sort of broad topic number one. And then broad topic number two is going to be something that I know you and I have a lot of common interest in, which is data sharing and biomarkers and like fostering community collaboration. Because I think that the X Prize has the potential to be situated sort of like as a nexus of where lots of folks are going to be measuring all sorts of different things. And something that we talked about with purpose of the LBA is to be sort of a standard setting or kind of standard approving organization. You and X Prize have kind of made some real, I don't know, yeah, some progress in that direction. So my first kind of grounding question is, can you give us an update on like where we are in the XPRIZE Healthspan journey today? Like, how would you describe the work that's gone into it today? People are signing up. What are those parties doing? And kind of what's going to happen in the next sort of 6 months as teams begin to start competing?
I'll go through a little bit of a verbal on the second part of your question on which teams are signing up and what are they doing. I do have a couple of insider slides that I'm happy to share with this group, just so you can see we do a rolling teams recruitment update is that, for any, I mean, it's a large scale global competition, and it will only be as successful as the partnerships we make and the teams that sign up. And so that's something that we keep really, really close eye on. So where we are now, I was looking at the names and the folks here. About half of this audience is involved in this prize in some way or another. So either as an advisor, a partner, a supporter, a scientific advisory board member, or our very first donor is actually on the call right now is Sergey. So again, really formative in helping to shape and create the prize. So I have no qualms about sharing some of our inside stuff here because this is the group that it's most relevant to. So again, large scale competition. We launched publicly on stage in November of 23. And unlike, we didn't go out with a fully formed plan, and this was by intention, is that we went out with a public launch in order to have a public comment period so that we could get advice and thoughts from people around the world, potential teams, companies, investors, and others about what they thought should go into this prize. Is that, as everyone here really clearly knows, there's not a gold standard proof that if you have somehow affected or intervened or improved how we age, is that there's not one standard set of things that you would measure to know. And so the first step was actually to open ourselves up for criticism, is to put out our first thought and then let people beat it up. And honestly, as Sergey could probably tell you, our first thought wasn't actually the first thought. The first thought that we went out with was actually multiple iterations in, is that some early work had gone into thinking about this prize as a concept around epigenetic age and epigenetic clocks. Did you have a therapeutic that could change a clock? It then was iterated on several times since then to really refocus on function. And so here, looking at muscle cognitive and immune function, and a critical differentiator from this prize to others is that we were promoting clinical trials, certainly. So this is testing in humans, as that was seen as one of the major gaps, is how do you get from a rodent or an animal model or preclinical work and actually get into trials in a meaningful way. And so the prize is designed to bridge that. And a critical decision point, often in trials, right, we're thinking about prevention. And in this case, really setting out something really audacious and ambitious, which is not around prevention, but improvement. So again, a critical differentiator. And so this was a very conscious decision of, what could you do in an early stage trial to really de-risk what would be needed for one of those large scale slides. Yeah, so I know you're not seeing slides. I'm giving you a verbal right now of where we're at. I'm going to jump in directly into some team recruitment slides as soon as I give a little overview. So we started this thing. That was part of the journey. So again, we're looking at improvement in function. So those were some of the critical pieces that we knew we didn't want to change. Outside of that, we really let people beat us up about what this would and should look like. We took 6 months to go through that process, actually 7. In July, we wrapped up a lot of our public comments and thoughts and put out a competition guideline set that was more detailed, and had a little better sort of concrete answers on what we would expect people to do. So this included endpoints, but also study design. So I'm happy to go into study design in a little bit, because again, that concept's a little different. So we're still looking at improvements in 1 year in muscle cognitive and immune function. Some of those components really haven't changed. Other nuances have. And again, a lot of study design, a lot of work there. But in the meantime, have been on a global effort to drum up support, bring in new partners, bring in new investors, get attention in this space, build a global collaborative network, because we're really finding that very few teams exist right now that can alone solve this kind of challenge. And so try to build partnerships where they need to exist. And of course, is really get this launched and get teams on board. Okay, so here's teams recruitment. So this is the insider stuff, you guys. This is kind of fun. So this is where we exist right now. So we've, and actually I think 431 was our number from end of last week. And we actually have a few more teams from there. And so these are teams that are pre-registered. So this goes into that whole public comment period where people could just put their name in and give us a general sense of what they were doing, and very little else. So again, the first bar was a pretty low barrier. So again, this is the largest number of possible teams that have so far pre-registered. We're still open for registration through December 20th for those that want to be considered for early milestone funding. So again, we're open. So our goal here is we wanted by the end of 2024 to get to 500 teams. And we wanted to see where these teams are coming from. Do we really have a global interest? And I would say absolutely resounding yes, there's a global interest. Coming from everywhere, we are really enriched, of course, in North America, which is not terribly surprising. XPRIZE Foundation is based in the US, but we still do have a global presence. And I think some of these numbers would look different if we actually started grouping some areas together or distributed things sort of on a per capita basis. But certainly the US is number one. If we started grouping some of our EU sites together, then I think we would get a little better representation than this shows here. But certainly has been nice to see, and we're keeping really close tabs on where these groups are coming from. So our first teams that came in, a lot of those were either for-profit or not yet incorporated, or sort of the unknowns. So again, when we first launched, I would say in the first month, we had an overabundance of teams that had a great idea and very little else, or a terrible idea and very little else. But now, now that we've continued on, the teams that we're starting to see are, I would say, are much more serious and more focused. Especially now that there's a 12-page qualifying submission that goes with it, and people have a better understanding of what we're asking. And so the general breakdown now is just over 50% of our teams identify as an existing for-profit company. A majority of these are of some variety. Some are not yet incorporated. Some of these are maybe groups that they're still trying to form. They're just getting started. Our university teams, we're right now sitting at about 10%, and those are climbing much quicker now, which we're not surprised. So this university is all-encompassing, any academic group. So this is it's a broad group, and again, there's typically on that side more red tape for those teams to go through in order to submit something, is that they would be submitting on behalf of their institution rather than typically just an individual. So those tend to take a little bit more time, but we do see them starting to come in. And classically in XPRIZE is that this is a very standard breakdown. From prizes that have gone before in other sectors. So again, we really are sort of following trend. We do have a couple of publicly traded companies that have signaled an interest, and we'll see how they proceed. None of those are sort of top 10 pharma companies or top 20 pharma companies yet, but I will tell you guys candidly and confidentially that there's very strong interest right now in watching this space, which is exciting. Okay, so probably not competing, but there are some companies that are signaling a very strong interest in following closely and possibly providing a home or a runway. So that's good news. And so again, this is a breakdown of what they are. We ask all of our teams when they file their registration is, have you ever had a patent or have you done anything? And again, these are just ways for us to figure out their fitness. Are they capable? Are they prepared? Are they thinking forward?
So maybe this would be an interesting jumping off point that I think would provide some clarity to this group of like, what is the expectation from you and XPRIZE? Like, okay, I want to compete. What do I need to bring to the table in terms of the data that I'm going to generate in order to compete? I basically need to have a drug or an intervention, right? I need to have an intervention of some type that I move through all preclinical studies and run basically a small phase 2 in humans, right? So that's kind of like, if I want to really sort of take a shot at the title in XPRIZE, I need to bring that drug plus the funding for doing that to the table. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's about right. Yeah, so I can give an even broader overview of exactly what we're asking them to do, but that's essentially it. And so before I jump off, just to finish these out, I'm going to give you really quick, and I'm going to come right back to that. So just for those that are interested, this is out of those for-profit companies that have identified there. These are their stage. And so if this is helpful to folks, certainly we have some investors that are sniffing around really strong. And so they're really interested in sort of the staging of the company and who's so that's there. And this is our funnel. So again, I just want to emphasize, and this is actually number is higher now, 430 plus. And again, we have this funnels down. So we're looking for 500 interested to ultimately get to, I would like to have at least 100 teams with qualifying submissions so that we can make great judgments. And again, we do have 2 separate tracks. We have a Healthspan track. There's also a $10 million bonus track for FSHD. So we have several teams that have signaled that they're going to do both. So again, this is a reflection of our funnel, and this is a reflection of what teams are doing. So again, I can come back to this if it's of interest, because I think the number one take home here is that we're seeing a variety of solutions that are coming in, whether these are new drugs that maybe a company or group has sitting within their pipeline somewhere that they've perhaps started some of the preclinical studies and they're just looking for a new avenue, or if they're looking for combinations of things, whether that's with other agents or with lifestyle behavior. And we do see majority of teams coming in and suggesting a combination approach. Okay, so that's, I'm going to stop share there. And I'll see if I can, just because I don't want to take you all on a ride through slides, and give you just a snapshot of the timeline of where we're at and what we're asking teams to do. Is that some of this, I think, is a little bit easier seen than said. So again, really data light, just to give you a sense of what we're asking. So the teams that are coming in now, we're asking for qualifying submissions. So we've opened, this is our primary registration. We're in it right now. We opened at the end of July. And for those who want to be considered for this milestone 1 funding, they have to put in, actually any team has to put in a qualifying submission. It's the first barrier for judgment. And so that's where we're going to look at a team in terms of their research and development to date. We want to know something about the company or the lead investigator or whatever research network is coming in. We want to know what clinical center these groups are planning to use. So something about your environment. And again, we're seeing a really wide variety, and we are not setting boundaries on what that needs to be, just preferably not your garage. and that just to know that safety and that our teams are actually very serious and capable of running trials. Next, we want to hear a lot about the therapeutic or the approach. And so again, we're not demanding at this stage that teams even have their thing narrowed down to a single agent. We're actually letting people go in. If you have a screening procedure, whether it's an in silico matched with, preclinical organoid or clinical trial, whatever that is, think about whatever you need to do to figure out which you're ultimately going to test in a one-year trial, and leaving it very open about what that approach looks like. So again, it can be going in with a single, can be going in with a combination, can be going in with a very solid, a priori defined screening approach. All of those are on the table. And so this is the one thing that XPRIZE is different for me as a trialist, where I want to control everything, is that it has been a lesson in humility for me to learn how to take my hands off and just let people figure it out. And so, so our teams during this qualifying submission, they essentially have 12 pages to prove it to us. Tell us about your team, tell us about your therapeutic, show us your R&D to date. Definitely do, we are requesting that any teams for the drug or therapeutic that they're working with, is they at least have to own the IP or have, clearly have a license to use it. So again, we are discouraging folks from using somebody else's drug without permission, which.
So if I can double click on that quickly,
Yeah.
Something that immediately comes up when thinking about this is that the last slide you showed, it jumped out to me that 60% of the submissions were suggesting a combination of therapeutics, which strikes me as an extremely high number for it's not necessarily a nonsensical approach, because aging, like especially if you're going through these three different functional groups, like you might need multiple agents to get there. But it does point me in the direction of thinking, oh, well, these are most probably agents that have already been approved or used elsewhere.
A lot are.
A fair? Yeah.
Yeah, that's very fair. And so that's, something we're seeing. I would say, we do have a number of these sort of longevity clinics and other clinics that are going in, and especially in theirs, is that we might see a laundry list of things. And it's going to be really hard for them, I think, to pass through this earliest milestone, is to put out a coherent approach by which they're using these. And we've also had now a couple of those companies come back and ask us if they're interested in using, say, GLP-1s, but don't necessarily want to get a license or approval, of asking if they can go around it by going to a compounding pharmacy or other. And so we're refining our language on that as we speak.
Because one thing about the rules of the competition, kind of accepting in sort of, let's call it broadly speaking, sort of generics, meaning things that are already approved, that may have some applicability here, is that as I look at that requirement for finals of like 1 year of clinical trials, I'm like, oh, how much investment have the companies that I've been involved needed before they run, their 52-week chronic tox in order to even enable a 1 year clinical trial with a novel agent. And it's a boatload of work, right? Most companies, are like, have raised well over $100 million by the time they've reached that stage.
Yeah, and so this has actually been a really fun conversation, is actually translating some of what you just said to teams that are working out of a lab. Is getting them, because some people look at our 7-year timeline and be like, oh my God, you're not making awards until then. It's like, if you've ever run a trial, you know how long it takes. Is that this is a very accelerated timeline to try to get people in the field for a 1 year trial by 2026. I mean, it is lightning fast. especially for groups that are using novel drugs. But I also do want to emphasize in a lot of those combination approaches is that many of them are looking at lifestyle. And we're looking at lifestyle very broadly. So that could be, are you taking circadian rhythm into account, right? Is that you want these dosings to go at these times, or you're changing behaviors, maybe a fasting mimicking diet plus something, or, some are doing activity or other sort of, or other interventions that they might want to couple with a therapeutic. And so again, our goal right now is just to not limit them, let all of the ideas come in that need to come in. We are setting up a judging panel that will review these qualifying submissions at the beginning of 2025. We'll make our first awardings for that. So again, $10 million gets broken into 40 teams. That's not much money. That's $250,000. And so when we do that award ceremony for those teams that pass on to either the finals for FSHD or to the semifinals for this prize, is that we were coupling, and again, huge interest to this group, and I'm going to flash some dates. We need to hone in on dates, so I'd love your advice for when people are available. But at the same time that we're doing the first award ceremony, that's going to be April or May of 2025, we'll be coupling it with an investors and funders summit. And so for each of these teams who are actively looking for investors or looking for financial support is, they'll have a chance to get up and present what they're planning on doing. And that we'll try to, again, XPRIZE, we stay hands off. We don't collect anything on that. We just try to get the teams the most support that they need. And so that there will be people that are already lining up to be in the room when that happens, is that they really want to meet and see the teams and see some of the solutions that are coming out. And so again, XPRIZE stands back. We let the teams present. We'll bring in as many investors as we can, and just let the process work. And so the goal is that we'll have that investor summit. We'll have team summits every year. We'll do a down select after semifinals, and those semifinals are proof of concept studies. So this can be a de novo, that teams are doing this as part of the competition, especially if they're testing something new or going into a new pipeline. And again, we're setting very low criteria for what that is. Teams get to define this depending on what they need. If they've been using a drug, say a chemotherapeutic agent, and they want to try to repurpose it for aging, that they may, their goals, what they need there is maybe not PK/PD data. Maybe what they need is, can we recruit in this particular population? Can we, whatever they need out of that, whether it's feasibility, whether it's recruitment, anything there. For us, honestly, it's just to de-risk the teams that we invest in for finals. So for finals, we just want to make sure, can you recruit human subjects? Do you have a clinical center? Can you get your drug? Can you get your drug or your compound, through distribution? Can you administer it safely or reasonably? And it's like a huge feasibility check for the prize. They have 1 year to do this, to show us that they have collected data in humans. And again, if somebody's already tested this and they've already done that work, they just have to submit the data to us. So it's not, if you've already done the work, you don't have to do it again as part of the prize. You just have to submit it. So again, we're trying to keep this with our teams in mind as much as possible. And so then that gets checked here, goes back to our judging panel. They'll pick the 10 teams that move on. And again, the 10, it doesn't mean that other teams can't continue. They just have to submit a letter of intent to continue. They can continue, but we would just encourage them to look at the judge's critique. So if there is a safety issue or a concern, we would ask that they meet it before continuing on. So again, and then by 2026, going into those 1 year trials to compete for the big bucks. And so just put out here on years, this is what that looks like. We did a public launch. We're in a qualifying submission. We're going to make our first judgment early 2025. That's with an investor summit at the awarding. 1 calendar year to show us that you can do something in humans, whether that's 5 humans or 30. If teams are doing their A, B, A plus B, whatever that might be, it's their year to figure out what they need to do and show us that they have a path and know exactly what they're going to do for finals. Because starting in finals, we really invest in our teams. The finals, again, the awarding from us is only 1 million. And anyone who's run a trial knows that is only 1 million. That's barely scratching the surface. But again, at each of these time points along the way is that we'll be coupling any award ceremony with media presence. We have documentary teams following ours already, with investor summits, with funders are looking at possibly opening up strategies for academic teams, so, different requests for applications or others, as we're trying to actively support that, and just see what we can do to invigorate investment in the space.
As you and I know, Jaimi, like $1 million is,
Yeah.
is only an inch towards
Yes.
the mile that it takes to run a trial. But that's in some ways also kind of the magic of the prize format, right? This is the reason that XPRIZE is kind of exciting and has worked in the past, is like it creates a road where like you only have to give a little bit of extra gas. This is the idea, like you give a little bit of an incentive to go down this road, and then all of a sudden a lot of people are going down that road. And other resources come to fund that. So I don't want to diminish the possibility of the multiplier effect of the prize format.
Yeah.
One question that I have, and I then want to get to the sort of group, people turning on their cameras and jumping in. But as I look at your sort of schematic, the 1, 2, 3 that you just presented there, and I look at the finals, right? There are phase 2s and then there are phase 2s.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is like you can run a phase 2 trial that is kind of an investigator sponsored, really uncontrolled, like a few patients get some drug, and like a lot of these things you barely learn anything from. And then there are phase 2s that are really robust, deep, difficult to run trials.
This is
How
one
do
of
we?
those.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a phase 2B with a capital. Yeah.
Okay.
It's so we're asking our teams to run 1-year studies.
In how many patients?
Yeah, so and I'll show you. So the goal now, we've revised just a tad, is that we are not setting out a specific number yet. The goal target, I would say, would be 100 total.
Okay.
Okay, so this is, so these are not hundreds of people, but it is 100 total. And the challenge here, that I think, and that particularly for this group, people who are really savvy, have run trials, know what these look like. So the 1-year time frame is long. We know that. The other thing that we're looking at doing is trying to change. Oh, that did not work, did it? Let's see if it actually shares this time. Okay, great. So again, these 1-year trials, this is a snapshot, the PCOT, for anybody familiar, right? The population, 50 to 80, leaving as much leeway to our teams to decide what that population looks like. We just ask that they be non-terminal, right? Mm-hmm. So not a life-threatening disease. This is not for late-stage cancer. This is not for late-stage chronic kidney disease or folks on dialysis. But outside of that, you can really pick and hone your patient population. We're not demanding they be healthy. So again, if you're developing a therapeutic for a disease indication of some kind, there may be ways, if it's a stable condition, that you could get some crossover to keep them enrolled here. Interventions to the team, a control group will be required for each of these, because again, if we're decentralizing, each team can run their own trial. Because we're going to get different populations, we do insist that there be some sort of a control group. Doesn't need to be a 1-to-1 randomization, but you do have to have something there for us to help with our judging outcomes, and then the time. And what is important that we have landed on over this last year, and this is a big point, and this is a deviation from how many trials are run, is that we're not setting our judging by the average. These are personalized response thresholds. And so what this ends up looking like statistically for how we are judging is a single crossover design. So again, very different. It is higher touch than many phase 2Bs would be. And we know that. And so looking at this, because we don't have anyone's life history going into a trial with middle-aged and older adults, knowing that they look very different, is that we're collecting at least 3 baseline points out of a 3-month period. Intervention starts, and then again, we'll have an interim and then another 3 towards the end. And so that, again, this is one way that that person does serve as their control. and that we're going to be looking at and collecting internally through a data coordinating center, right, is that we're going to give you guys at the beginning of this, the finalists will have, these are target thresholds, sort of approximate percent changes that are required for that individual, given where their baseline is, what would be a 10 or a 20. And that each of these persons on each of these measures that are dictated out, that are judged for the prize, is that they become a responder, non-responder for each of these points. Okay, so it is a little bit different. So that's how the judging is going. And so for anybody running trials, I think this is a really important point to look at. And there's a lot of reasons we did this. It's more robust against differences in populations. It gives us a slightly better playing field. Ideally, right, if you have a control group, whoever that is, this is one reason I'm not set against this one-to-one, but you shouldn't have very many spontaneous responders in your control group at the levels, because these are going to be large magnitude changes that we're going to be required to be a responder for any time point. So again, this is really different. And it's that the other thing that this does for us is James, is back to one of the points that you made, is I did not leave my knocking on the door of tenure and putting in my promotions materials, and I was very happy in my academic life. I didn't leave it because I just wanted to award the money. I left it because this has a great potential to change how we think about drive investment, sure, but also the data that results from this is that by setting all of these into a single crossover design, is that rather than looking at 10 finalists and 10 trials, now if each person is their own trial, we have a much greater capacity to actually look for trends across therapeutics. And that there's better for effect size building and calculations that would be a resource back to the community. And there's better opportunity for biomarker and looking at, sort of dose response curves and other things that could be really informative beyond just sort of for us to adjudicate the prize.
This is an excellent, and I think, an appropriately detailed kind of dive into this. Super useful for me. I recognize that in our hour we only have 20 minutes left,
so
I want to make sure
sharing.
that I don't fill any more airwaves as well, and I invite everyone on the LBA to, if you have a question, turn on your camera and jump in. Nir, we can start with you.
James, I have a question for you. Okay.
Oh, okay.
And I'm responding to your question of, people will use many models, some specific and some that are already there. Suppose that you're going with a Rapalog, okay? Your company is going with a Rapalog.
Let's pretend that I have an interest in Rapalogs.
Let's
purely hypothetically.
Let's pretend. I chose the Rapalog on purpose, you'll see. But you have to show three things. You have to show better immune response. You have to show better cognitive response. And for now, you have to show that the muscle is bigger, okay? We're debating that, okay? With Rapalogs, you're not going to get the muscle bigger. So you have to find a way to use something else like exercise, right? Or something else in order. So I think what I'm saying is, I think there's no choice for most people for those three domains that are kind of, there's trade-offs. You cannot not choose a combination. What do you think?
My initial response to this is when Jaimi said that it's a combination of something plus lifestyle or plus diet or something like that, that snapped together to me of immediately making sense. That you're taking, because we know that lifestyle is such an important, like if I was starting at a baseline, I'm even remembering back to the Methuselah mouse prize, where like one of the best performer was just sort of enrichment and like good diet and exercise interventions, right? So that made total sense to me, that you would take a breakthrough therapeutic and then try to combine that with sort of a best in show diet and exercise regimen to give the maximum possible responsiveness to the criteria that Jaimi outlined.
Right.
It's weird from a drug developer point of view, because usually when I think of that sort of combination, it's like, oh, that's going to create noise in my variables that I'm introducing into the trial, but the purpose here is different.
Can I ask a question? Jaimi, the endpoint is muscle size, not muscle function?
No, it's function. So we're
Okay,
looking at three. So we put out a table of so there's three things within it. So one is, and again, it's not just muscle, it really is, it's about mobility and function.
Right.
So we have two performance-based measures and one non-performance-based measure. So the two performance-based measure, one is around like an endurance capacity or exercise capacity. So that would be, our gold standard recommended would be like a VO2 max.
Right.
But knowing that not every site might, by the time we get to our 10 finalists, we'll get to know those teams really well. And so, we'll have a chance to talk to them. It's like, if you don't already do VO2 max, or that's not going to be part of your clinic, here are the other ones that are at least decently correlated with that measure that would be an option. And so, we're looking at those. So one is like endurance capacity. That would be either VO2 max or say a 400-meter walk or a 6-minute walk, if you can't access that. The next is power. And so that's, leg press power and knee extensor power. If you don't have a fancy machine, then we would look at like a 1 repetition max or something like that. That's a little noisier, but at least well correlated. And then the third measure is that, yes, Nir is right. We have gone round and round about whether to keep this third measure in or out. And that's looking at muscle mass. A standardized way that we could do muscle mass that would centralize the measure is a urinary D3 creatine. That again, it's pretty cheap, it's pretty easy, and then you would just ship us the urine and that we would measure it centrally, so it also takes it off the team's expense. So anything that we assay centrally, it's on our dime. And so that helps rather than having people to do an MRI or a CT scan or something like that. So the challenge there is that with these in particular, so we're not saying that you have to show improvement in all three. It's that you have to have responders in 2 of the 3. So it can be endurance and power, or it could be power and muscle mass, or something like that. So again, because when we looked at it, knowing that for many of these, if you look at interventions, is that if something improves VO2 max, it often might have an inverse effect actually on muscle mass. Right. and vice versa. And so they don't change together, even if they are moderately correlated at baseline.
So Nir, we don't have to worry because the Rapalog will help power and endurance.
Yeah.
I was provocative. The same, if you use metformin and VO2 max, then you're not going to get increase in VO2 max, but you're going to get a lot of other stuff. So, yes. I think that's the complexity.
Yeah.
So, Asela, I saw you unmuted. Do you have a question you want to jump in?
I do, yes. I'm new to this community, so in a way of introduction, I'm with Celergy. We're a private company developing mitochondrial therapy. We're running on seed money. We are raising our Series A right now. And my question is there at all a way that a team developing new drug can qualify? Because, the timelines are very, very strict, but I'm mainly talking about regulatory. I think I've seen in some of the conditions for qualifications are quite strict, documenting proof that the intervention has been regarded as safe by a regulatory body or is under consideration. Obviously, if you are on your way towards the IND, that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, no. So we're not requiring at submission, but we do require that you've at least thought about and have started your submissions in that regard, just timeline wise. The ultimate goal, right, is that we want some evidence that you can actually test and administer in humans. And we know the timelines are tight, especially for new drugs. We know it's tight. So there is a little bit of wiggle room, is that we require that at least by qualifying submissions, give us some some evidence that you're at least trying, you've got your paperwork in, you're working towards your IND. Or wherever you might be testing, whatever that regulatory body is. Right. And, is that ideally, that you would have that by 2026, ideally you would have that in hand to go into finals. That's one of the biggest, barrier paths for that is to show that you're ready to go in. But again, if you're looking for consideration and maybe you can't be put in to be one of those official milestone 2, is that it doesn't kick you out of the competition. It just says, hey, we're still waiting on this. We'd like the opportunity to compete. Here's my letter of intent to continue. And then you communicate back to us before that continuance goes. And so, so for anybody who's sitting in that gray space of waiting for approvals or hoping this happens, is to stay in communication, is that you might miss the opportunity to be considered for a milestone award, but there might still be an opportunity to continue on if you do get that approval.
Okay.
That's the best I can give, but we know the timelines are horrible.
Thanks.
Michael, did you want to jump in?
I can. Good seeing you, Jim. James. One, thank you for that. It was very helpful. I just had two observations. One was it did occur to me just from someone who's taken a lot of novel drugs to FDA and first into human and through to approval, that there's an inevitable interaction effect, I think, that's going to play out, right? That if you have a xenobiologic or you have a complex gene engineering, the regulatory safety requirements on those technologies, it's not tight. Like it really, if you're starting now, you can't get to these milestones on that timeline, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. I think things that are repurposed drugs, though, repurposed combinations, drugs with kind of are similar to other approved drugs there, I think, to your point, like you can push and hopefully get those milestones. But I think, unfortunately, I think just by definition, some of the really cutting edge stuff, there's just going to be an interaction effect. You're not going to be able to get those timelines, the preclinical requirements for xenobiologics. It's simply not doable with any amount of cash, right? So that was just one observation, that there's going to be an interaction around the types of technologies that can make the timeline. That's probably just inevitable, because I mean, unless you really have a long timeline to allow everyone in, right? It's good because the regulatory pathway is not the same, right, for all technology.
Nope, totally understood, totally known. Yep. So that's a known going into this, and those are the decision points. Is that we're not going to run a 20-year prize, like we just can't do it.
Exactly. Can I have an optimistic view about what you said? And I totally agree with you, but I think, who knows how many years we'll be able to achieve in the XPRIZE. But the nice thing, and I'm sure about what I'm going to tell you, is that there'll be new technologies that will be proud to break the XPRIZE. And this is where the future is going to be, right?
Amen. Amen. Is that, we want to set the bar high, and it is going to be tough, but that at least we're establishing something of a framework. And that, again, once we get some of those dose response curves, if you come out with something that's really wild and you test it, there'll be something that you can compare against. And you can say, and we would have, if it weren't for those meddling kids, or whatever the Scooby-Doo things are in the background.
And the other thing I was just going to note, having done a lot of work in the past on neuropsychological endpoints and looking at cognitive improvements in both nootropics and also like cognitive impairment in schizophrenia. There's a really interesting precedent for some of this, which you likely are already aware of, in the work of the Matrix battery. So like the Matrix battery was this FDA, NIH industry collaboration around establishing what outcomes would be used to establish cognitive improvement in schizophrenia, because patients with schizophrenia have, one or sometimes two standard deviations off of cognitive function. So there's a huge opportunity for improvement. By and large, in fact, using some of the same endpoints that I see that you're using, right? The challenge there is just the practice effect with neuropsychological testing is profound. And so you end up with staggeringly large placebo effects, which are sort of unfortunately inherent in the testing. Even A/B stuff, it doesn't fix it. You end up with these huge effects. And I guess, just again, I don't mean to be a naysayer. I'm just saying, on the cognitive front, if you look at the attempts that have been made to improve cognition in schizophrenia, those have been, unfortunately, kind of, relatively robust failures, despite the fact there was a lot of potential for improvement in that group. It's really kind of primed to improve. And it was both a combination of a complicated condition, and these endpoints are, a real challenge. So that'll be an interesting challenge. And I think your approach of a per patient kind of trying to define responders is a good one. The challenge with cognition is that, because repeated testing, a lot of people are going to look like responders, and that effect is so large that getting an incremental effect on top of it is a real challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. That was definitely a point from Perminder and some of our cognitive experts that were looking at that, is that there is no battery to get around that practice effect.
Right.
But we do have, some of the cognitive assessment batteries, there will be a practice effect, but hopefully not of the magnitude necessary to interfere with the responder, non-responder. But it will be hard. Agreed completely.
Yeah, right. Especially in a patient population that's otherwise normal, because the memory decline over time is gradual. And so it's like you really need a nootropic. Like you really need something to like powerfully boost cognition. And we do have a few of those already that are approved. Many of us are drinking probably one right now in the form of caffeine, but in any event. So.
Oh my God, if caffeine won this, I would be delighted.
That'd be great.
ITP refused to measure, to do caffeine, but
is that true?
Yes.
Yep.
Huh.
No, those are all excellent points. And would just say also to this group, before I get off, two really big points I want to make is I'm happy to would be happy for anybody here, if you're thinking about competing and you have follow-up questions, just call me. Like I really am. We're very approachable. And then two, if you are interested, but maybe you're working on something, you're like, there's no way this is going to be ready for trials. There's no way, or I'm working on something in a different pathway now. I'm not into it. There are other ways to get involved. We're actively looking for judges. And from people that really know the space really well. So again, if you're looking at this and you're like, yeah, I'd love to be involved, but I'm not going to lead a team, please reach out to us anyway. There are other ways to to follow along in this journey that we're looking for really knowledgeable people to, again, either partner with. We have a lot of teams that are requesting resources and support that are interested in the space, maybe entering it for the first time, and they're looking whether that's for medical deputies, experts, advisory board, so again, there's 1,000 ways that folks in the LBA can get involved. And then, really big ones is, of course, is to follow along at our award ceremonies and investor summits. So again, whether you're a team looking for funding or joining along, is that, we want this to be as inclusive to folks working in the space as possible.
And I think that pathway goes in two directions, Jaimi, as you're interacting with new teams that want to kind of connect up with this group, which has mostly been kind of some of the let's call it more established industry players that have kind of been gathered together in the LBA, those 400 and whatever teams. I think the connection between you and Risa, and I know that you guys have had some conversations about this already, of kind of hooking them up with our little community and resources. I see this network that you've built or are in the process of building around XPRIZE potentially as a synergistic one with the group that we've assembled at LBA.
Yep. And for your own benefit, I will not direct all 400 plus teams to you, because there are some god awful ones out there. So we'll do the first pass and make some introductions.
I appreciate the filtering mechanism. And I know we could keep talking for a long time. We didn't even get to talk about biomarkers and data sharing.
Oh, yeah. Update on that, if I can say, really quick. We revised our language. Data.
Okay.
It was written in the guidelines about data ownership going to XPRIZE. We've revised that now. So competitor guidelines that are going out are being revised. New agreements coming out. And again, now we've made it very explicit. The team data that's used for judging is owned by the team. So that team owns their own data. They can use it for what they need to, for filing for anything that patent, like whatever you're looking for, is that data is owned by the team and that ownership is retained by the team. But that we would ask that to be granted access and use of the data by XPRIZE and the Data Coordinating Center for the purpose of judging, and an extension of de-identified data for scientific greater good, so that we can do some of those combined analyses. But again, but the ownership of the data resides with teams, as does the IP. So that was actually from a couple of LBA members actually brought that to my attention, that the ownership issue was an issue. And so again, we are not the government, we're a prize. And so we really actually strongly encourage is that if there's feedback or things that can be redlined, bring them to us because we can often redline. This is, again, it's not going to be an immovable structure.
Jaimi, thank you so much for being here and spending this hour with us. Thanks to all of the members who chimed in and listened along. Jaimi, to those of us here and then folks within the group that may be watching this later, you don't have to give your phone number, but like how should people reach out to you directly?
Yeah, so I'm writing right now, putting my email in the chat is the best way to get to me directly. That way it's also monitored. So for some reason I am out and about, which does happen. I'm putting also our group one. So this one, the Healthspan at xprize.org, that one goes to our entire operations team. So that if I'm traveling strongly, always recommend to put that one in the CC'd line if you want to reach me. Email is better often for me than phone, is that I know that those two are monitored. And I have a very, very good detail-oriented prize manager that if I don't answer something quickly, she lets me know. So
that's a gift.
If you do the two, you are guaranteed a response.
Okay. And yeah, I think something that I would just mention to all of the existing and new members of the LBA when we do these kind of roundtables is that like having, a question here or there in a discussion is sometimes really helpful, but now, your face and name are recognized by these folks. And I think where these meetings have sort of blossomed into relationships and been interesting for me is in the follow-ups. So when someone like Jaimi says, please do follow up, please do talk with me about how we can work together, I just encourage everyone to take advantage of that.
That'd be great. And then Joan, another just a really specific shout to you is that our experts agreed to disagree on immune function, that they said that there's no clear path. So we just put in something that was like sort of a baseline justifiable thing to go out with guidelines. I'm looking at possibly hosting an immune function work group to help make decisions in 2025 that broadens that base. And so we can actually at least put something, even if all we have are really good SOPs, and make some final judgment. Because that was the one that we put in and they said it's too nascent, is that they didn't feel that there was something that we should do right now. And so Joan, please check your inbox, is that once we can identify sort of a time or place or how we're going to do that, would really value your attendance.
Absolutely.
Great. You know more about this than most. So it would be wonderful.
Sign me up.
Good.
Sign me up.
Well, Jaimi, thank you again. And
of course.
Thanks to all the members for hanging out with us for an hour.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jaimi. See you soon. Take care, everybody.
See you next
Bye.
week, Jaimi.
Yeah, see you in Switzerland.